Welcome back to DES Trucks. In today's video, I want to talk about warming up your engine. How long should you warm it up before you go? What's a good rule of thumb to follow? This topic has actually come up because one of the bigger channels, Dave's Auto Center, talked about this topic, and he took some heat from some viewers because what he said, I believe he said something along the lines of you shouldn't necessarily waste your time warming up your engine, because you can just start it up, give it maybe 30 seconds, and then you can go. But I'm kind of running off memory. I watched his video a few days ago, so correct me if I'm wrong on what he was actually saying. But I think he was saying something along those lines. And I think that maybe sparked a lot of controversy in the automotive community with regards to warming up your engine. How long do you suppose to warm up your engine? I think a lot of people don't want to get inside a cold vehicle. They start it up maybe 15 minutes before they go. And is that a good thing for the motor or a bad thing? And why would you ever consider doing otherwise? So we're going to talk about that today. This is my setup though. This is my 23 F450. It's got the 6.7 high output power stroke. It's a 450 like we said. So it's got the wide track front axle. I've actually got a snow plow on the truck, a big old 10-foot snow plow here on the front end. As far as our modifications are concerned, we've got some limitless lights installed on the remote control here that you can just like hit the button there and make them blink. Pretty slick setup. But let's talk about this topic. Should you warm it up? What are the recommendations? What do I think about what Dave Auto Center said about this topic? Oh, I'm getting to a warm truck right now. Well, somewhat warm. It's 104 degrees on the coolant, 41 degrees outside. And this is interesting because, like I say, caused a little bit of controversy in the community, the automotive community, where different mechanics had different things to say. I think Ford Boss Me, who is another pretty prominent YouTuber who's got quite the following here on YouTube, done a lot of work with Ford trucks. He made a video talking about his thoughts on it. It was a good video. I recommend you go check out Ford Boss and what he said about warming up your engine. But what are my thoughts as not necessarily a diesel mechanic, but as an individual who is very mechanically inclined? I work on my own vehicles. I've installed engines. I've done maintenance. I've done heavier repairs as well. But it's not what I do day in and day out. But I am an owner of these vehicles, and I do like to think I know a little bit. But I'm going to say some things that, again, just like Dave's Auto Center, it might be controversial. So comment below. Try not to get too upset about what I say. And I know it's going to probably be controversial, and it's going to be a lot of fact checking, which is nice, which is fine, you know. But at the end of the day, just try to be civilized about this discussion. But is what Diesel Dave, or I don't want to say Diesel Dave, actually I just think it's Dave's Auto Center, is what Dave's Auto Center said wrong? I don't think what he said is necessarily wrong. As far as waiting, you know, I think he said maybe 30 seconds or something, and then driving the vehicle. I mean, nowadays, your oils are pretty good if you're running what they're recommending. In our case, a 6.7 Power Stroke. If you're running, you know, 5W40, 10W30, 0W40, whatever's, you know, as long as it's a recommended viscosity, and you're in like the normal lower 48, maybe you're in the northern states and it can get a little bit cold, you know, 32 degrees Fahrenheit, maybe 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Start it up and you drive after 30 seconds, even at like 15 degrees. It's not really gonna be the worst thing in the world. I mean, should you let it warm up at that point? Me personally, I would. And the reason I would let it warm up for, I don't know, 10 minutes or so is because I feel like the engine's not really ready right when it starts up. I mean, as far as clearances are concerned, piston to wall, cylinder wall clearance is not quite there yet at those cold temperatures. Everything's just tightened up a bit because everything's cold. I don't know. Once your clearances, I think, are actually bigger when it's real cold like that. So your piston can slap a little more in some cases, depending on the engine. Some engines were so bad that there was a legit piston slap into the engine warmed up. I don't think the 6.7 is that bad, but it's certainly loose when it's cold, and it tightens up as it heats up, and the clearances tighten up, and it becomes ready to run, ready to roll. So I would like to have some heat on that motor. You don't have to be all the way hot. Like right now, 105, it's not all the way hot, but a little heat on the motor. Now, the one catch-22, I guess you could say, the caveat to that is, being that it's a diesel engine and it's a direct injected modern diesel engine, how much heat does that engine actually make if it's like 5 degrees Fahrenheit outside? Well, if you're just starting up the engine, technically, if it just idles there, it's not going to get hot enough just on idle. These engines that idle, the diesels, the direct injected engines and the diesels in particular, being that they're all going to be direct injected, they don't run hot and they don't burn a ton of fuel at just idle, at base idle. They're so they will have the tendency of running cold. So if it's freezing temperatures outside, say 32, or even really cold like 5 degrees Fahrenheit, 0 degrees Fahrenheit, it's very common in the United States and some areas, it will sit there and idle and lose heat and then overcool itself. How is that? Because at idle, it doesn't use that much fuel per combustion cycle, and it just doesn't run that hot. The pistons aren't moving fast enough. There's not enough compression at that engine RPM to really get an efficient burn, and it just doesn't take that much fuel to keep that engine rotating, and it just doesn't take that much heat with no load to keep that engine just spinning around. And then it could end up with a situation, presumably, I mean, this is all speculation, because with these new engines, they do tend to kick up the idle on their own with the computer. But you can run into a situation where it's wet stacking. Now with the new engines, I'm not sure if they really run into that issue, meaning they wet stack and the fuel doesn't burn and it sits there and doesn't ignite all the fuel. There's unburned fuel in the cylinder, and it's putting extra fuel into the oil, and it's just polishing that cylinder wall, and it's just prematurely wearing the engine out. I think if you're looking at older diesel engines, like some of the earlier direct injected engines, like maybe the 7.3, I think if you're looking at those engines, maybe those ones could be more prone to wet stacking, just because of the amount of computer intervention that can come in. Because if you were to just run that engine and it's going to run cold, would it on its own kick up? I never owned a 7.3 Power Stroke from like 2002 or 2003 or year 2000 to know how they really idle, but even those probably have enough ECU activity going on even in those days that they probably kick up the idle too as well. But that wet stacking would not be good, and that's not what you want. Plus the engine would just run cool to the point where you'd have cold air coming in through the vents. So the one thing to really consider is having a high idle installed on a diesel truck, because these modern diesels, they need to be kicked up in the idle a little bit, and that would give you a little bit more ability to raise some heat on the engine, to tighten up the clearances, to get a little heat on the motor. But you're not really going to get heat on the motor if it's just idling at base idle. And I think that's what Dave's Auto Center was alluding to, is like, how much heat do you think will actually heat that engine to get it warmed up if you're just sitting there idling? So now we're talking about the engine, but there's other components in the vehicle other than the engine. There's universal joints, there's transmission, there's rear diff, there's transfer case. I think it's a good idea, if you're going to be in those cold temperatures, to slowly ease into the drive don't get in it and just accelerating all over the place. I think you're wearing things out, and you're going to have a loose vehicle when the miles get a little higher. I think if you, in those cold temperatures, you just take it easy and give all those fluids a chance to move around. Even the drive shaft. I mean, there's not much fluid in the drive shaft, but a universal joint has a little bit of grease. And if you just, and oftentimes not even serviceable either. They just have like the amount of grease they get from the start is the amount of grease they get to the end of that vehicle's life, or if that drive shaft fails or that universal joint fails. So the front half shafts, some do have grease points, some don't. I think this 450, first time in a while that the half shafts, I don't think they're greasable on the front. So for the four-wheel drive system. So those fluids, even though it's a little bit of grease or whatever's in those universal joints, give them a little bit of time just to heat up, just to move at a lower stress, lower speed, lower load, going, 15 miles an hour. If it's real cold like that, going 15 down your street, and let it just get a little heat on it before you really gun it. So do you need to sit there and let the engine get hot? No, I mean, you could go after about a minute, and you can just ease into the drive, let it warm up while driving, let everything warm up, and you can be good. Or you can let the engine get warm, high idle it, and get the creature comforts going, get the heat inside of the cab going. If you plug in the vehicle, even better for diesels, plug it in overnight. Or even that's kind of a can of worms. It's like they don't want you plugging it in overnight, too long. They want you to plug it in like 4 hours before you go. You get into it, you're already at 100 degrees or so, give or take, depending on how cold it is outside. But typically you can keep about 100 degrees Fahrenheit on the engine if it's plugged in, and you're good to go. You can warm up a little faster. Still need to creep for a minute, creep the drive slow for a minute, but you're going to be ready to go sooner. So I think, you got these multi-weight oils. You got these oils that have, like, in my case, I'm running 0W40 in this truck. I think a lot of people get caught up on that zero. I've even had people comment and say, like, that zero weight oil is just so thin, it's going to, like, make a very chattery engine, or it's going to be real clicky or whatever, because that you're going to have typewriter tick because the oil's thin. But at the end of the day, the zero doesn't mean that that's the weight of the oil. The first digit in the multi-grade oil for the SAE certification or specifications is not the weight of the oil. The second number is the weight of the oil. So if you have a 5W40, that doesn't mean that your oil is a 5-weight oil. Just like a 0W40. If that number represented the weight of the oil, then my oil would be 0 weight. There would be no oil. There's no such thing as 0 weight. That's like not possible to be 0 weight. There would be nothing there. Your oil would just be empty because it's 0. So the first number doesn't represent the weight of the oil by any means. The weight of the oil is the second number. If you have a 0 weight, it's a 0W20 or 0W30 or 0W40, well, you got a 20 weight oil or 30 weight oil or 40 weight oil at operating temperature. Only thing you're gaining is better cold start. You're not losing too much of the operating temperature, although when you go to like a 0W40, typically those oils will be getting very close to just being a 30 weight, but a thicker 30 weight. Think about how much range there could be between a 30 weight and a 40 weight. That 30 weight classification has a range of different oils. Well, any oil is going to fall in that range, but there's a lot of space between a 30 weight and a 40 weight, where an oil could be kind of in the middle, or thicker, barely a 30 weight, almost a 40 weight. It's not the most specific form of measurement. Like if you actually measure the viscosity of the oil with an oil analysis, you can actually measure it very specifically down to like a fraction of down to the fraction. I mean, but if you're just talking about what you see on a bottle, that's such a broad range. 30 weight, 40 weight, 50 weight. Two oils could be 30 weights, but be totally different viscosities. One could almost be a 20 weight, like a thicker 20 weight on the bottom of the 30 weight spec, and then one could be almost a 40 weight of a very thicker 30 weights on the side of the thicker side of the 30 weight spec. So you really can't get hung up on the first number being 0, 5, whatever. It just means that it's gonna flow. It's gonna flow like that 40 weight sooner, and it's still gonna need to warm up. Even a 040 still needs a quick warm up, but it's just gonna flow quicker and get to a 40 weight quicker. Still thickens as it cools, and as it gets colder and colder, it still thickens up. It's just able to very much quicker get to a 40 weight. It doesn't thicken as bad when it gets cold. It still thickens a little. So doesn't mean that it acts like a 5 weight. A 5 weight oil would be like, it'll be impossible for the oil to become 5 weight and then become 40 weight. That's not like physically possible for at least the oils that we run in our engines. I mean, we're not running like space grade super lubricants that could actually be thinner and then get thicker. That's not what they're doing. They're just able to mimic behaviors. They're able to mimic the operating temperature of a 40 weight at all temperatures, I guess, at more of a broader range of temperatures, if that makes any sense. But like I say, this is gonna be a little controversial, so comment below and let me know what you think. And I want to hear what you got to say. But is Dave's Auto Center wrong? No, I mean, he's not really wrong, but I think it would have been better if he just explained it a little bit more. Like these diesel engines, they don't make the heat that people think that they make if they're just idling. There is a factor to consider, and most people don't know that. I would think, like, at idle, these engines don't make that kind of heat, and people will ask the question, why is my engine speed kicking up? Well, the emissions sometimes need a little more heat for something to occur, whether it's the DPF or the SRS. But sometimes the engine just needs more heat in order for it to burn efficiently, or in order for it to get up to operating temperature. So a lot of things to consider. I mean, these sensors on a gasoline engine and a diesel engine, not all the sensors work when they're cold. Like, I know back in the day when I was studying this stuff, we learned about the lean rich threshold, and we're using the O2 sensors and the mass airflow sensors and all this stuff. And it was straight up like, if you started a vehicle in a cold weather, it couldn't run efficiently because the sensors weren't ready. At no heat or just cold start, your O2 sensors don't even function right until they get all the way hot. So the computer wouldn't know exactly how much fuel to put inside the engine to achieve the lean rich threshold. So it just ran a little bit on the rich side based on the displacement on the engine. But everything that is occurring in the environment affects the lean rich threshold. Your elevation, your air density, the air temperature, all that stuff affects the lean rich threshold. And until the engine's up to operating temperature, it can't accurately be measured. So it can't accurately be burned, get an accurate burn, an efficient burn. So it goes to a predetermined amount of fuel to be injected per combustion cycle until the engine gets hot enough, and then it can now reach the perfect or the perfect lean rich threshold, the perfect fuel to air fuel ratio, and then it can actually run the engine without causing excessive wear. Because if you're not running the engine, if you're not running your engine within the lean rich threshold, then it's wearing excessively if you're just running it rich. So they've been able to, with the lean rich threshold, they've been able to cut down cylinder wear quite a bit. Like you can look inside an engine with like 130,000 miles and see that engine is not really worn out. The cylinder walls, at least, are not worn out compared to back in the old days before the multi-port fuel injection and all this lean rich threshold stuff. These engines used to be worn out at like 100,000 miles. They'd be very, very worn, measurable wear. Whereas like now, the cylinder wall can look new on the engine with miles on it. But anyway, my name is Sean. This is DS Trucks. I just wanted to talk real fast about should you warm up your engine. You don't have to really warm it up. I mean, you can wait 30, 45 seconds, maybe a minute, and then you can drive it. But the 6.7s, they actually won't let the truck go into drive unless it's been running for like 10 or 15 seconds or something like that. It's in the book, in the manual, or in the computer on the Oasis computer or whatever. The engine doesn't want to run. It doesn't let you put it in drive too fast if you just started it up, because they were having problems with the crankshaft and the amount of passageways that it takes to get into the crankshaft on these engines. There's quite a lot of oil passages that the engine has to go through before oil reaches the crankshaft. And they had crankshaft failures in the very early days of this. They're fixed. They delayed the engagement of drive using a computer for, I don't know, maybe 30 seconds. You probably never even noticed, but like on the old 11 through 16 trucks, you start these things up, it won't engage in, it won't let you put it in drive. It won't even go in drive for a few seconds. I forget the exact amount of time, if it may be even 30 seconds or something like that. And I think these new ones are like that too. I'm never in the truck. I always remote started anyway, so I don't know, what it's saying. But I could probably just get in it. It obviously does its wait to start and everything with the glow plugs, but I don't think you can just throw this thing in drive. It protects itself using the ECU because they don't want you jacking up your crankshaft. So I think if that's the case with this engine, it's safe to say that it's probably a good idea to wait 30 seconds, 40 seconds, a minute. Let the fluids flow. But yeah, you don't need to like let the engine get hot. I mean, just take it slow, I guess I would. Or just gun it. I mean, probably not the best idea, but I mean, take a chance. Columbus did. But anyway, my name is Sean. This is DS Trucks. See you in the next video. Over and out.